Hi everyone. My name's Kitty. My pronouns are they, them, and I host the LGBTQ plus group through the Psychedelic Society of Minneapolis. And my original talk was actually titled Walking in Liminal Spaces, a closer look at gender expansiveness and psychedelics. At the very last minute, I felt it was necessary to address some of broader concepts that are happening right now in our community, and decided to talk about vulnerability and psychedelics in terms of liminal spaces instead. So if you're not familiar with the concept of liminality, liminality exists as liminal space. It is considered an intersection that connects two existing concepts. A very familiar example of liminality is a Venn diagram. It's where they intersect. It is derived from the Latin word limen, which means threshold, so essentially like a boundary. Everyone has experienced a liminal space in their lives, and not all liminal spaces are actually equal. A defining characteristic of liminal spaces is vulnerability, which means that they can be really uncomfortable, uncertain, and kind of painful. But they can also be like mysterious, eye-opening, and wonderfully transformative. There are different types of liminal space. I've narrowed it down to three. There's momentary liminal space, and most of these spaces are defined by the time in which they happen. Momentary liminal spaces are considered almost instantaneous, and it's how they connect the concepts. An example of this would be when people become parents. 1 second they're a parent, or 1 second they're not a parent, and the next second they are. When a loved one dies. When a relationship ends, but then there's some positives. Not that becoming a parent is positive, but yeah, it is. Getting a new job or starting school. Momentary liminal spaces have beginnings and ends, but they almost appear to happen at the exact same moment. Periodic liminal spaces are extended over a period of time, usually has a definite beginning and end. They don't happen continuously through someone's life, but they happen in our lives. And we all have experienced one periodic liminal state, puberty. And the final type of liminal space is considered APOC, or spanning a lifetime. This type of liminal space does not usually have a definite beginning or end, and overlaps with daily life constantly. These types of liminal spaces can fall under categories of race, gender, sexual orientation, and disability. They can have a definitive beginning or ending, but not necessarily both. Another classification of epic liminal space is contained in the concept of intersectionality, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. Intersectionality was a theoretical concept conceived by Kimberly Williams Crenshaw in 1989. Crenshaw is an African-American feminist scholar who is a lawyer and a professor at UCLA Law School. And the most succinct definition of intersectionality that I was able to find was actually on Wikipedia, which I love. And it said that intersectionality is the consideration that various forms of social stratification, such as class, race, sexual orientation, age, religion, creed, disability, and gender do not exist separately, but they're actually woven together. And guess what? We all have intersectional identities, though some contain more privilege than others. And the ones that don't really contain a lot of privilege tend to fall on the margins and are considered marginalized. The marginalized intersectional identities are often the ones that are more vulnerable, because the society we live in deems them different, not normal, less than, or something to be scared of. a few of my intersectional identities that affect my daily life. I'm queer, I'm non-binary, and I'm white. I also live with a disability, and I deal with chronic illness. Those are all intersectional identities. And the amazing thing about intersectional identities is that some can have privilege and some can be marginalized at the exact same time. But not all intersectional identities would be considered APOC liminal space. And those are what I like to call apex intersectional identities. I made that up. And apex is just the top. It's the top. It's often associated with apex predator, and that's not what I'm associating it with. But the apex intersectional identities are white, heterosexual, cisgendered, able-bodied, neurotypical, and male. These are the ones that contain the most privilege and the least vulnerability. Finally, why is this important in regards to psychedelics? I actually have written my notes, look around the room, and I'm thoroughly surprised at how wonderfully diverse and awesome everybody is. Woo! And so, yay. But that's not usually the case. Usually, there is a disproportionate amount of apex intersectional identities that are drawn to psychedelic experiences and psychedelic communities. The thought leaders in our psychedelic communities, the ones that are considered experts, are mostly white, heterosexual, cisgender men. This inherently creates a power dynamic that is biased to those identities and gives them more privilege than they already have, and creates an aversion in our community to identities that are considered marginalized or diverse. This is the cool thing about psychedelics. It's a wonderful and redeeming quality that a psychedelic experience is a chance for any person, no matter your privilege or your marginalization, to walk in a periodic liminal space by choice that is intentionally vulnerable. A psychedelic experience is considered a periodic liminal space because it extends over a period of time, meaning that it has a definitive beginning and end. And it's a liminal space because it connects two existing concepts. It connects perception and illusion, waking reality and the dream world, the seen and the unseen. Psychedelics grant an opportunity to people who may never exist in a prolonged state of vulnerability or even a continuous state of vulnerability, a real chance to actually walk in vulnerability. The psychedelic experience is a chance to grow, transform, and change your point of view. And that's totally cool. Sorry. But some of you might not know what vulnerability actually means. The definition of vulnerability is defined as the quality where a person is susceptible to being physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually harmed. Some people who walk in lifetime existing liminal spaces with marginalized intersectional identities live in a constant state of vulnerability every minute of every day. And when it comes to the psychedelic experience, we're going to do a little math. If someone who walks in continuous liminal space with intersectional identities that are marginalized, like a person of color, or someone who is transgender, or non-binary, or someone who is living with a disability, and then they have a psychedelic experience on top of that, their vulnerability is magnified. And this is compared to someone who is walking into a psychedelic experience not experiencing continuous vulnerability in their lives. So, this concept of walking in liminal spaces intersectional identities and vulnerability is a necessary conversation that we need to be having right now. And it's because right now in our psychedelic communities, this conversation is happening and it's not good. In the last 3 weeks, the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines has posted 2 separate articles, one detailing a trans woman's experience with ayahuasca, and another that detailed the power dynamics of race and whiteness in psychedelics. Both articles were met with intense backlash from the psychedelic community on every social media platform they were published on. If you're interested, I'm giving you a trigger warning. There's no actual comments posted on the Chacruna's website, but every other website, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook groups that have reposted these articles, hundreds of comments are made. And many of these comments were racist, sexist, transphobic, homophobic, and just hateful. This is how the privilege of vulnerability shows up in psychedelic spaces when we don't acknowledge that vulnerable people might be hesitant to magnify their vulnerability, even more so, just for the sake of healing, self-discovery, and transformation. People with privilege who get to turn their vulnerability on and off when their psychedelic experience is over, and not recognizing that that doesn't exist for everyone, it's another form of apex identity privilege. So how do we change this imbalance? When someone with a lived, marginalized experience who walks in continuous liminal space that is constantly vulnerable says that psychedelic spaces are unsafe, toxic, abusive, unwelcoming, exclusive, or just generally inaccessible, we don't dismiss them. We listen. And then we do the work that is necessary to right these imbalances. And we make those changes. And we make sure those changes stay. And if you have privilege, this is the work to be doing. So how do we do that? We can dismantle toxic psychedelic culture in our community through actively promoting psychedelic accessibility. This would mean creating access in a psychedelic experience which takes into account safety for marginalized individuals and inclusion of diverse intersectional lived experiences. There are many ways to do this actively, and really the best way is to listen to the people with these lived experiences. Listen to the people who walk every day in liminal spaces. Listen to the people who are asking for these changes, not for anything, but to feel safe. Psychedelic accessibility does not diminish the psychedelic experience, but it makes it open and available, safe and inclusive to everyone. The most important piece of this whole talk is this slide. If you have privilege, if you do not walk in continuous vulnerability every day of your life, if you do not have the intersectional identities that are apex and prioritized in our society with power, if you walk every day scared that something is going to happen to you, that being vulnerable is your existence just because of who you are, if you don't have that experience, then I ask you to remember this. You don't have to understand someone to respect them. And I liken this to psychedelic experiences. If you have had a psychedelic experience, sometimes it's really hard to make people understand, or have them understand, or have them get it, what it was like, what you saw. But you just want them to respect that it happened. The same thing goes for people and lived experiences. And I ask that if any of my words make you feel uncomfortable, or angry, or upset, or if you're thinking that I have too much of an ego and I can't let go of labels, or maybe I haven't done enough work with psychedelics, or maybe that I don't get it. That right there is the seed of the problem. And we all have a lot of work to do. And I fully believe that we can do better. And these are my thank yous. Thank you, Jessica and the Psychedelic Society of Minneapolis, putting together this symposium and letting me talk about really hard things. Thank you for Emma Gray for letting me use her photography and the slides. Thank you to the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines for so courageously having these discussions online despite backlash. And thank you, all of you, for being here.